all of you here tonight, because you're going to have a special time with an intimate conversation with Marilyn Morley and Sandra Thwaites. So we are here, gathered here, regardless of where we come from. We're all interconnected through the land that we live on, the water we use, and the air that we breathe. And for thousands of years, this very abundant land where we are sitting on has been the ancestral home and territory for the First Nations and the Métis. We remember the unique history of the Indigenous people who lived here, the Anishinaabe, the Arawandouan, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis. And we especially thank the Mississauga of the Credit First Nations for walking lightly to preserve this territory and for sharing this land with us. We want to continue a journey towards reconciliation and understanding the promises that were made for the treaties for this territory. And tonight is a special night, an up-close, personal night, to get a sense of real people and real places and this time and now. So without further ado, I think we'll turn over to Ted for a prayer.
Thank you, Mary. Good evening, welcome, and why don't we bow our heads in prayer. Creator God, we are just so thankful for the beauty of this beautiful world that you have created. We give you thanks for all the elements of fire and water, air and earth. And we ask that we may be able to live together in harmony, that we can find ways to find the truth and truly reconcile so that all may be one. We ask that you be with us tonight. We thank you for the gift of Marilyn being with us. And we ask you to open our hearts and our minds as we listen to the conversation, and then let us ponder it in future days as to things that maybe we could do to be able to aim towards that true reconciliation. We pray all of this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
So I'm going to turn the conversation over to Sandra Thwaites. And Sandra, if you don't know, but comes to Glen Abbey United Church, as she has a special passion for sewing, and she is a sewist, and has made a really passionate commitment to using sewing for good. And so she's going to, the theme around this night started with a conversation with Sandra. After having met Marilyn, I thought, whoa, this is the perfect combo together. So I have a feeling that that's going to happen in conversation tonight. So without further ado, Sandra.
Thank you, Mary. I hope everybody can hear me. Yes? No? Maybe? Okay. Thank you, Mary. It's really nice to be here today with Marilyn. I met Marilyn earlier this evening. We shared a meal, and I know that I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to say, and I hope you will as well. To start, Marilyn, maybe you could tell us just a bit about yourself, where you're from, where you've lived, what you do, what you're passionate about.
Wow. Okay, I live in Dundas, just outside of Hamilton, and I have been married to my husband for 54 years, and actually he's been my rock throughout my whole life, but now I'm his rock because he's not well and I have to take care of him. So I have 2 daughters who are just gorgeous, but my grandkids are even more so. Oh, they are the light of my life, I'll tell you. And I'm passionate about quilting. I love quilting. I'm passionate about tennis. I'm an awesome player for 79 years of age. And I'm passionate about education. Even though I've been retired now for 25 years, or maybe 28 years, somewhere around there, I taught for many, many years on Six Nations, and in Brantford, and in Hamilton as well. But I think that once we get talking about the residential school, I think the answer is in education. Okay?
So you mentioned that you were a teacher on the Six Nations, but your education started at a residential school?
Yes, I'm a residential, we call ourselves survivors. I'm a residential school survivor. In 1951, my mom passed away, and there were 5 of us under the age of 7. And so my dad wasn't able to look after us. He himself was an iron worker and an alcoholic. So he couldn't take care of us, so we went to live with my grandmother, but she had 12 children of her own that she had raised. And remember back in the late 50s, 40s, families were huge, right? Do you remember that? And so she had raised most of her children. She still had a few at home, 3 or 4. And so she kept us for a year, and then it was just too much for everybody. So rather than us be separated and go our separate ways, we were sent to the residential school at the Mohawk Institute in Brantford, which is about 10 miles or 10 kilometers outside of the Six Nations Reserve. So I was born on Six Nations, and I am Delaware through my mother's bloodline and Mohawk through my dad's. I was there for 7 years. 3 of my sisters were there with me for 7 years, and I don't want to tell you about any of the horrible things that happened. Nothing really horrible happened to me myself, but I have friends who, one friend was molested by the minister, and growing up, I must have worn rose-colored glasses because I don't remember anything happening like that to me or to any of my sisters. Not saying that it didn't, but they kept that to themselves, and they were ashamed. And I think one of the things being at the residential school is you are instilled with shame of who you are. You weren't allowed to speak your language. I remember a group of girls, the boys were separated from the girls, right? And so if you had a brother, you weren't allowed to talk to them at all. But I remember a group of sisters came from Curve Lake, and they could only speak, I think it was Ojibwe, and they were strapped on the hands if they were caught speaking the language. So I think that overall, the residential school took away, first of all, their language. Not mine, because I went there not being able to speak any language at all except English, because that's the way my family was at the time. But they took away the language from a lot of the children there. They came speaking it, and they left not knowing it at all. They weren't allowed to, they took away the culture, I guess, the ceremonies that those children grew up with. They weren't allowed to participate in them. They weren't allowed to talk about them. And I think that is the real disservice done by the residential schools, is taking away the language and the culture. And just this past summer, could I just keep talking?
You just keep talking, yeah. Go right ahead.
This past summer, we had the Anglican, well, see, the Mohawk Institute was run by the Anglican Church, right? And so the Anglican Archbishop of Canterbury, I believe, came to Canada, and he came to the residential school there, and he wanted to meet with us, but he wanted to come and apologize. Well, I think most of us survivors are past that time of apologizing. It's so easy to say, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. You know, well, I'm sorry, you're sorry. You know what I mean? It was overused since the 2008 when Stephen Harper apologized. I thought that was great that he did it, but then since then, everybody's apologized, and Mr. Trudeau has apologized for everything, everywhere. So we're just a little bit tired of it. But anyway, he came, and when we told him, he asked us what he could do. And on Six Nations, we have been trying since 1986 to get a language school built. It started out in a condemned old school, and I know that because I was the primary consultant at that time, I worked with the speakers and that were starting at kindergarten, and we worked out of an old condemned school, and then they moved to somewhere else, and they've moved for the last, I don't know how many years, 25, 30 years, they've been all over the place, even in a veterans hall at one point. But I think that's something that the government and the Anglican Church, if you want to do something, build that school for those children. Because I remember when they first started that school, and I don't know the language, but these two ladies that were doing the Mohawk and the Cayuga classes, they had these little kiddies come in and sit in a circle, and they would talk to them in the language. And by Christmas time, those little kids were talking, and I used to just get goosebumps on my arms when I would see these little kids, asking, can I go to the bathroom, or can I do this, or can I do that? And and they would say it in the language. And I thought, wow, this is really something. So I think that we passed, like I belong to the Residential School Survivors. It's a group that we have. It's called a Survivor Secretariat. And we talked about it, and we said, that's all we want, is just to restore the language to some of these students. And we do have a high school on the Six Nations that is Cayuga and Mohawk, and those children that graduate from there are just amazing. They've gone all through from JK right up to grade 12, speaking the language, and they're going on to university. They are active community members, and they're trying to keep the language alive. And it's very difficult because there are still old people like me who are ashamed of the language. You're ashamed that you can speak it. I never could, but it's that type of attitude that the older people have. Just speak English. Don't bring that into the home. So it's that type of attitude, but it is changing. And it's nice to see that there are people graduating from the high school who are very successful. Like some of them are artists and musicians, and it just warms my heart when I see them after graduation.
So you've spoken a little bit about the survivors and the shame that they continue to feel. Is there anything that you think that, other than younger people embracing the language and embracing the culture, do you think that will help reduce the shame that some of the survivors may still have felt as a result of their residential school experience?
I think restoring the language is a good start. I think that they will. I don't know, but I think that no matter where you come from around the world, if your mom and dad speak the language, you should also speak it. It should be passed to the children. And in some countries, they speak 4 and 5 languages, 6 languages, and there's nothing wrong with that, right?
My husband comes from an Italian background, and when we had our first child, I remember my in-laws asking us if we would be teaching them Italian. And I said to them, well, maybe you should have taught Joe Italian, because then somebody would be here to teach it. But you're right. I mean, it's a large part of culture,
right?
Is language, and it is important, whatever the family background might be, to continue to have a second language. And French, obviously, we're supposed to be having as another language as well.
My grandkids are learning Mohawk. It just warms my heart when I hear them, and they'll say, "Gunalukwa, Grandma," and or Judah is what they call me, Gunalukwa, Judah, and they had to teach me how to say that. But it means "I love you, Grandma," and it's so sweet, eh? Or my grandson took Mohawk class last year in high school, and he loved it. He loved the language. He liked the cadence of how you say a word, and it kind of flows and goes together, and he thought it was great. He was just rattling off some words, and I don't know what he was saying, but I'm proud of him for doing it.
Is this something that's going on across the country? Or is it unique to Six Nations Reserve, or is it something that's being done in other areas of the country as well?
I think anyone that went to a residential school did lose their language.
Right.
They lost their culture.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know about other other communities.
Okay, fair enough. I thought since Mary had mentioned quilting, I thought...
That's my other passion.
Yeah, and you did as well. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the quilting project, Quilts for Survivors.
Right. That started by a lady in 2021. Remember when they found the bodies of, 215 out in Kamloops, BC? And she is Native herself. She lives up in Timmins, and she thought, what can I do to make the survivors, like this was a very emotional time for everybody, no matter where you went to the residential school, the fact that they were finding unmarked graves, and just, it goes through your mind of what could have happened, and it was very, very emotional. But she thought, what can I do to help? So she had a group of friends who liked to sew and make quilts, and she thought, we'll just make some quilts for the survivors, and that just snowballed, so that we have now people from all over Canada. Every province is participating into the states. Different states have quilters who are sending quilts up to her to, send out to survivors. We have people from Norway, Australia. All of these people have come together, made quilts, and sent them up to her. And she has, if you wanted a quilt, you put your name down there, or if your mom had gone to the residential school, you could submit her name and tell a little bit of where she went, number of years she was there. And Vanessa would send out a quilt to that person. And it was just greatly received by everybody across the country. And like I said, it just snowballed. It's just phenomenal. They have now sent out over 2,000 quilts across the country. They have, they're getting donations of material, thread, anything that you would need for quilting. It's being sent up.
Some people are sending them quilt tops, and they're finishing them by putting them together with the backing and the batting, and sending them out. Mm-hmm. And some of them, people are sending finished quilts up as well.
Mm-hmm. And I belong to a quilting group on Six Nations. We're called the Peacemakers Quilt Club. And we thought, okay, a lot of our community members went to the Mohawk Residential School. And so we start making quilts for them. And unbeknownst to me, my friends in the quilt club, they made a quilt for me, and I'll share it with you. This just warms my heart when I wrap it on the quilt. And I can identify every block. Here, let me help you. Who made it? And they are all part of our quilt club. Like I know, like who made each one. And eventually I'm going to put their name right in here somewhere. When I remember, I'm close to that, and then I'll know, oh, there's that quilt block with Judy made, or there's the one that Judy made. So, yeah, and I just treasure it. That's the book that we do. And then we just had to notify Vanessa that, yes, Marilyn already received a quilt, and she was a survivor from the Mohawk Institute. So on Six Nations, we have probably made and completed the quilt. We donated it to about 27 so far sent out to everybody. And okay, thank you. And while we're on quilts, our quilt club. This is the one lady that I was telling
Here, Marilyn, I'm going to give you a microphone, and Mary and I will hold the quilt.
All right. You mean you couldn't hear me? Okay. This is a quilt that was made by Sherry Southgate. She is a new member to our quilt club, and she can't sew a 1/4-inch seam. She admits that. But she does applique, and it's beautiful. In fact, the last time she was at one of our meetings, she showed us a quilt that she had done. She used to go to Arizona, I think, every winter, and there was a quilt group there that she belonged to, and they taught her how to applique. She has made quilts that have been appraised for like $4,000 a quilt. They're just gorgeous. And this is one that she made for a survivor. I don't know who it's going to yet, but I think that person will love it. And this is another one that we made. I just grabbed a couple to bring with me. And you can see that the orange is Every Child Matters color. That started by a lady out in BC, I think. When she went to the residential school out there, they took away her orange t-shirt that she was wearing, and she still remembers that, so she started the Every Child Matters and the orange. But you can see, and if you're a quilter, you can see that those points are almost perfect. We were just talking about that, how nobody else notices anything but the color, but we look at it as a quilter and say, oh, what sharp points. Okay. And is there anyone from the teen quilt group here? Anybody? Are you quilters at the back? No? Would you like to be? I have brought something for those teen quilters or for the quilting group here at the church. And in October 30th, we had a gathering of all the residential school survivors from across Quebec and Ontario. We had it up at the grounds of the old Mohawk Institute, and I'm telling you, that was just so emotional. Like you were just, if you couldn't control your tears, they were flowing that day. Even the men were talking and crying. Yes, this is a challenge for you. This is a panel to start, and it's called Going Home. And I tried to take you away from the orange, and I gave you a color to work with. So we'll see what you come up with in a... You're welcome. And I've seen some of the quilts that have been done with these panels. They're beautiful. They're just beautiful. Yeah. That green is my favorite color. That
will look very nice with the back.
No, I had help with that too. But I love quilting, I love playing tennis, and I love my grandkids.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that panel. I know that those panels, I waste a lot of time on the internet, and those panels came out a while ago for this particular project, and they sold out in about 30 seconds flat. That is a very hotly prized commodity.
Well,
Thank you very much.
There you go.
So I had seen them, but I wasn't able to get my hands on one quickly enough. And anytime anybody got any in stock, they just disappeared so quickly. So that means a great deal to me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The work that we're doing here, we've not made quite as many quilts as you have. We are the world's slowest quilters.
Congratulations.
But we mean well, and we do eventually get the job done. We have 2 quilt tops that we've completed so far, and we did have a Saturday day-long quilting drop-in session early in September. We'll be having another one on December the 3rd. Please mark your calendars. And quilting skills not required. If you can cut or press or just organize things, your skills are more than welcome. So we are continuing to work on those, but as I said, slowly. Apart from quilting, are you involved in other things? I think that Mary mentioned something about a remembrance park.
Yes, I think it's going to be shown up on the screen. At the Mohawk Institute, we're putting in a memorial park for all of the children that attended the residential school, and we're going to have a wall with all their names on it, and this park, I think, is my way of healing. That's why I'm so actively involved in it. Anything that happened in the past, I've kind of put it in the past, and I hope it stays there. But I want to see it to be completed. We've started by planting trees, apple trees. I'll tell you the story about the apple trees. Outside of a part of the grounds there was a huge orchard when we were children, and it was an apple orchard, and we weren't allowed to eat those apples though. So I remember one time when I was maybe about 8, and we used to wear those dresses, and it was a foggy morning, and I went out into the apple orchard, sneaking, beneath the fog and all this, and went into the orchard, and I filled up my skirt with apples, and I came back, and I was handing out the apples to my sisters first, and anybody else after that, and I was caught. I was strapped for stealing apples and giving them to the children. And another time I was maybe 12, and I was considered one of the older kids, so I was given some Christmas candy that the Rotary Club had sent over to the school to pass out. And so the supervisor said, "Marilyn, you take this box of candy downstairs to the playroom and pass it out to the children." And I got down to the playroom with this box of candy, and they flopped me to the ground and took the candy, and I was at the bottom of the pile passing it out to my friends and my sisters. So that was just the type of experience that I had, I look back on it now and I think it was hilarious, that the kids wanted the candy and they weren't going to stand in line and wait for it, they were going to take it. What were we talking about?
The park.
Oh, the park, yes. The park is called the Mohawk Village Memorial Park, and it's called Mohawk Village because at one time there was a huge Mohawk village where the chapel of the Mohawk Chapel sits now. That was a huge Mohawk village at one time. So it's called the Mohawk Village Memorial Park, and we have a conceptual plan for the park. We've started to plant trees, and next week they're putting in a winding pathway that's going to go through with flowers. And can we show the whole video? This is what we hope it's going to look like. This area has already been done with a ground penetrating radar. They're looking for bodies at the Mohawk Institute, and I hope they never find any. I really do. But this area has already been done, and so we're allowed to put things on it. We have the pavilion built already. Washroom, kitchen is fully equipped. And the trees have been planted. And next is the walkway. But you can see how it's going to feature water, a ceremonial circle is already in. And when I was at the gathering at the end of September, I was sitting around they have a sacred fire that goes all during the gathering. So one morning I was there early to pick up something, and there was one fellow that had stayed all night and tended the fire to make sure it didn't go out. And so I sat down to him and we were talking, and we got talking about his ancestors and where he his parents came from and his grandparents. And I said, you know, you're Delaware too? And I said, I'm Delaware too. And he said, I'm not Delaware, I'm Mohawk. And I said, well, no, you're Delaware. So anyways, I was telling him, I said, you be proud of your heritage. And anyways, we were sitting there talking. He was burning things in the fire and making like a little place to burn tobacco and things like that. And I said, what is that for? So he was telling me what he was doing. And I said, what about that stick beside it? He said, that's my sacred stick. And I said, oh, why is it sacred? And he says, well, it's sacred because I made it and I use it for the sacred fire. And he said, and I take it with me when I go out into the woods to look for, like fruits or whatever he's looking for, medicines. And then somebody came to get me, and I said, okay, I have to leave now. And he says, well, before you go, I want you to have my stick. Oh, my heart just went. So he gave me this walking stick, which is his sacred walking stick, and I treasure it. But you can see there's the sacred that's already there. So I think once this is finished, I'm going to be healed, I hope. So that's what I'm involved with right now. I'm helping with ideas for the park, and hopefully it'll be completed before I'm gone. Okay.
So this is obviously something that you hope that will outlast you and be there for generations. Are there other things that you're hopeful for the future?
On my bucket list? Well, the one thing that I was thinking when I had these questions ahead of time, I was thinking, what do I really want? One of the things I do want, and this involves Six Nations, is a lot of people now they're not against Christianity, prayer, or anything like that, but they're against the churches. It's at an all-time low there. You know, they just have they want little to do with the churches. So I thought, okay, we've got the Chapel of the Delaware, which I love. It's just a tiny little church on Six Nations, but it's my community church. It's my home church, and it was actually first built by my great-great-grandfather when he came with a group of Delaware natives up from, they lived down near the seacoast where Delaware is now, in that area. And they came, and as they were moving north over the years, like this didn't just happen, they just came, over the years traveling north, they were in contact with different settlers, and they were Christianized, and they became Methodists. So when he came up to the Grand River area, the whole group was divided into Christians and traditionalists. And if you're ever down Highway 6 going south toward Port Dover, there is a huge golf course down there now called Mont Hill, and it's right on Highway 6. And that's where the big house sat. They didn't call it, the Delaware didn't call it the Longhouse, they called it a big house. It was like a big barn structure where they held their ceremonies and everything. And the traditionalists and the Methodists, who was my family, tried to build this church where our present Chapel of the Delaware now stands, and they would take the logs down and, like just being mischievous, and the Mohawks didn't want the Delaware on their territory at all, so they would come in and chase lots of conflict back in those days. But eventually the church was built, and it has burned once, but it was built again, and it stands today. And it's close to my heart. It's a beautiful little church, not well attended, but all 8 of us, we have a good time. In fact, at Thanksgiving Sunday, we all had our Thanksgiving dinner together there for people who were alone on Thanksgiving Day, and we just phoned them up and say, are you having company over, or are you going to be by yourself? And they said, oh no, I'm just home for the day. Well, come on over for church and dinner. So we had a turkey dinner on Thanksgiving. So it's little things like that that we do. But getting back to your question, for the chapel, I'd like to see them build a memorial garden, with a columbarium, like those little niches for cremated remains. Because on Six Nations, I have noticed over the last few years that people are burying their loved ones in property behind their houses, or on their, and it isn't a designated graveyard, it's just on the property. And to me, that is so disrespectful, maybe for that family, but down the road what's going to happen. So I'd like to have a community memorial garden that's open to the community, not just the members of our church, but for anybody in the community to be allowed to be buried there, or their cremated remains stored in one of these little niches. That's one thing.
Okay. Are there more?
There's a whole bunch. My bucket list is like this. The other thing that I would like to do is encourage churches, like off the reserve, because I'm big on education, and people always say, what can I do? What can I do to reconcile things? How can I do something? And I was thinking, what could they do? What you could do is do a scholarship for a intergenerational survivor. We have a service on Six Nations that they send students off to university, and we have bursaries and scholarships there from different companies and whatnot. But I thought if the churches wanted to do something, that's one thing that they could do, is set up a bursary or a scholarship for an intergenerational survivor, because that's where the problem lies, is with the intergenerational survivors. You went to the Mohawk and you had no role model for being a mother. So you grew up without knowing what's motherhood all about, I know how to become a mother, but I don't know how to do motherhood. So I think that's where the problem is, and that's what leads to, and it's not just on Six Nations, I realize that, it's leads to the drugs. There's a real huge drug problem on Six Nations. There's alcoholism on the Six Nations, and I think a lot of that comes from babies having babies, not knowing how to raise their children, no support. When I left the Mohawk Institute, I was very, very lucky in that I had, not from my father, but from aunts and uncles that were my grandfather's brother and my grandmother's daughter. Like, they were a support for me and encouraged me to go to school, get your education. So without that, I can see the children just falling by the wayside thinking, oh, what's the point, So that's just one thing that I'm hoping will happen.
Thank you. I mean, and thank you for sharing that. I think that as for First Nations people, when we hear the stories about the children who have been lost and the horrors of the residential school system and the impact that has from not just on the people who survived, but subsequent generations as well, the problem seems so overwhelming, and we feel helpless to do anything at all. And I think that the hope that you show for the future and practical small things that can be done are things that are helpful to hear, because they're things that we can do, rather than just feeling overwhelmed and helpless, but they are practical things that could make a difference. Won't solve all of the problems, but maybe will help one or two people.
One person at a time.
And that's you know what, I the older I get, the more I realize no one person can solve huge problems, but individuals can tackle small problems, and then in the aggregate, change can be made and lives can be improved. So thank you for sharing that with us. We really appreciate that. I think I'll open the floor to questions. If anybody has any questions for Marilyn? Paul.
Relevant to your discussion about regeneration survivors, there was a quote up there, something to the effect that it's easier to build in youth than it is to fix broken adults. And I think the quote was from Douglas. Do you know who that is?
No.
That's it.
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
We can look it up.
Google
Google is your friend.
Douglas.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, John?
First of all, Marilyn, thank you very much.
Ah, Miigwech.
I'm interested in your memorial park and whether you're fundraising for that.
We are fundraising, but I'm not here to ask for money. If you want to make a donation, I'll gladly accept it, but that's not why I'm here. Okay.
You can provide to Sandra or Mary a link to where we could make contributions.
Yes. It's on the Mohawk Village Memorial Park website. Yeah.
I was going to tell you, I was privileged yesterday to be part of an educational event with an organization I'm involved in with two social workers from Niagara. One of them represents a large group of Indigenous agencies in Niagara, and the other one is a service director for the Children's Aid Society in Niagara. And keeping in mind one of the recommendations about TRC around reducing the number of Indigenous children in custody of Children's Aid Societies, those two organizations have merged something called the Unity Team, and they are working very aggressively to work together to reduce the number of Indigenous children that are taken into the worship of the Children's Aid because of some of those kind of societal problems that are coming.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
it really gave me some hope when I heard about a practical example like that.
That's good to know. Mm-hmm. That's good to know.
While we're talking about donations to the Memorial Park, and I appreciate that you're not here to ask for donations, nonetheless, we would like to make a donation as a thank you for coming all this way on a very dark and cold night.
It sounds like the start of a novel.
Not a good one. So we'd want to present this to you as a thank you.
Thank you. And I'll
If you
pass
could
that
pass
on to
that
the
on.
park. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think that's the end of our evening. There is some coffee and cookies that are out in the narthex if you want to stick around and talk to each other about any ideas that you may have come to you or anything like that. But thank you very much all for coming. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy lives to come and hear Marilyn's story. Thanks very much.
Thank you.